Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you are. Feel free to drop in the chat box where you're from and what do you hope to learn. And we will get started here in just a moment. The key thing here is to, in order to make sure that you are chatting with everyone, when you pull open the chat box, click the drop-down menu and select everyone so that you're able to connect with everyone. Again, go ahead in the chat box and put where you're from and what do you hope to learn. And we're going to get started here in one moment. Great, go ahead and put where you're from and what do you hope to learn in the chat box, and then we will get started here. Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Anise Fisher. I'm the founder and CEO of Developing Capacity Coaching. I have two very, very esteemed guest panelists here, Dr. Shahara Jackson of Life Prince Incorporated and Dr. Diane Robinson of Life Prince. You are in the presence of all women who have founded their own organizations. Our dear colleague, Dr. Samantha Cohen, is under the weather and just sends her well wishes to all of you all. She will not be joining us today. Our panelists are on the screen now. They will fade off of screen and then they will come back in about 15 minutes when we begin the panel session of our time together. We wanted to let folks know who've attended our workshops in the past. Normally, we record the entire webinar, but because of the current times that we're in and we want people to ask questions and to ask questions freely, once we have finished the structured panelist questions, we will stop the recording and we will invite people to ask those questions that you've been wanting to ask about how do you lead, how do you show up during this time, without having those things show up on camera. We're doing that to protect folks who are in the space and to honor our desire to have an affirmative space for you to just speak freely. If we can have our panelists head off of camera, I'll hop right into the presentation and then they will be back in about 15 minutes. So normally in Developing Capacity, we do a land and labor acknowledgement. Given all that's going on, we wanted to share a solidarity acknowledgement, and you'll hear me talk about this a little bit later. We are standing in solidarity with our global family for the end of pain and suffering of all forms of oppression and domination. We really believe that solidarity is the path forward, and it's how we're going to begin to dismantle the interlocking systems of oppression that is harming our people and our planet. And so while we don't profess to know everything about every oppressive issue that's happening, we do stand empathetically with our brothers and sisters who are seeking their community-specific liberation. As Developing Capacity as a company, we are building a multi-sector, multi-generational, intersectional global movement for healing, freedom, and justice. And with that, I'm going to invite us to just take a few deep breaths to bring ourselves into the space. If you've been to a webinar before, you know this is pretty standard to what we do. So I will invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to lead you through 3 deep breaths. You can choose how big you want to expand your lungs. That's up to you. So go ahead and close your eyes, stand, whatever you need to do. Let's take our first deep breath in. Exhale. Let's take another deep breath in. Inhale. Exhale. This last breath, I want you to inhale peace and exhale anxiety. Inhale. Exhale. Okay. Thank you all. We always like to do that just to ground ourselves in the moment. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the 4-step consciousness raising process as a tool for holding steady or taking action. And we'll talk about different anchors and sanctuaries that you can take in order to sustain yourself throughout these incredulous times. The key thing about developing capacity coaching for us is that we're focused on coaching people to effectively lead for equity and justice. This free webinar series is all around us building a movement of folks who have tools and skills, whether or not their organizations intend to invest in equity and justice. You will be able to have a resource of tools that you can deploy in the moment to effectively lead for equity and justice. We like to always ground ourselves in some key terms because people come into these spaces with a variety of different orientations and definitions. So these are our terms that we're using for this work, and you can consider them to be our offering. In order to build a culture of equity, we want to first define equity, which essentially is a concept where all members of your organization, your community, whatever the case it may be, across race, class, gender, any of those big 8 identities, they have full access and equal access to participate in and benefit from the resources within your organization. Full access means there are no barriers that's being put in front of them. Equal access means that we don't have disparities. Anytime you have a racial disparity, a gender, ethnic disparity, you have an equal access problem. And not only should people be able to participate in, they should be able to benefit from those resources. In order to achieve equity, you have to disrupt the status quo for greater representation. You have to dismantle any systems that are a threat to inclusion. A threat to inclusion are essentially when a person does not feel heard, seen, or respected in your organization, when they do not feel like they belong in your organization. That is a barrier to inclusion, and you want to dismantle that. The key thing for us is we don't just dismantle for the sake of dismantling. Everything is in service of rebuilding with people that are closest to the work. So you can disrupt all day, you can dismantle all day, but if there's no plan or strategy to rebuild, then we're not actually practicing the principles of equity and justice. And that must be done across 3 levels. Second, our definition for anti-racism. Anti-racism is a form of equity, specifically focused in on ending racism and white supremacy. Anti-racism is present when all people of color in your organization are heard, seen, respected. White cultural perspectives are not seen as the default norm. You are actively working to decenter those perspectives in order to honor the collective humanity of people of color. And they are able to freely express themselves without harm or punishment. You know that you have true interracial solidarity when white folks and folks of color are being seen, heard, respected, promoted, and given authority within the organization. What we are calling folks to at this point is solidarity, and solidarity as a way of life. And for us, it's the conscious decision to move away from only being polarized by your single issue, to be in solidarity with multiple issues. Right? I don't have to be a person that is living in Palestine to want to have solidarity with someone having freedom. I don't have to live in the Congo to want people in the Congo to have access to economic opportunity and their rights. So it means that I don't have to become an expert in every single issue, but I adopt a both and lens, which means I can hold simultaneously the advancement of justice for sexism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and xenophobia. I can hold all of these different single issues together under a common cause that we're seeking the end of domination for any oppressed group. And so what this means is it's a both and, it's not an either or. We're not fighting against each other for whose issue is most important. But that requires us to adopt a love ethic that's guided by empathy and a genuine desire to see global pain and suffering end for anybody that's facing oppression. And I want us to ground us with these terms because we hear them all the time. They're flying all over the place, but this is how we define them. The core of my time with you today for the next 10 minutes is going to be focused on our 4-step consciousness raising process. Will be the tool that we share with you. Please don't feel like you have to write down everything I'm saying because I'm moving quickly for a reason so we can get to the panel. However, I will drop in the chat box during the panel a handout that will list all of these steps and all of the questions connected to the steps. So you will have that for you to download and share it with your people and use it for yourself. So it's okay if you don't write down everything. So the 4-step consciousness raising process, I developed this about 5 years ago when I began to really lean into what does it take for people to show up in the fullness of who they are and to lead from their highest self. And it requires 4 things: choice, presence, self-awareness, and intentionality. If you don't remember anything I say, any of the orienting questions, the words tell you what to do. Choice tells you to make a choice. Presence tells you to pay attention. Self-awareness tells you to go deeper. And intentionality tells you to move with thoughtfulness. The key term that you're going to hear me discuss today is power. And I want to make sure that we all are on the same page of what this term means. This is an offering for us to you. We believe that no one is sitting down without power. The first source of power is your internal power, personal power. Think of this as all of the personal characteristics about yourself that make you who you are. I'm charismatic. I'm great at negotiating. I spent 5 years working in international development. Those are personal characteristics that you bring into an environment that gives you power. The second source is your internal power. That's how you choose how you're going to show up in your mindsets, your behaviors, or emotions. You get to choose how you show up in any given moment. That is your internal source of power. That's your number one power source that you have. The second is relational power. Relational power is how you leverage the relationships around you to move the needle to advance equity and justice. So I might not be in the highest position in my organization to advance equity and justice or have the highest ranking role, but I know how to tap a friend, call a friend. How many of you have ever called someone to say, hey, I need you to help me out? Can you make this call to this person because they're the gatekeeper to what I'm trying to do? So one thing when you're trying to advance equity and justice is to think about what relationships can you leverage in order to achieve equity and justice. I leverage my relationships with Dr. Diane and Dr. Shahara to bring their expertise on this platform. That was using my relational power. And the third power source is external power. And think of that as power given to you to perform a service. So when we elect somebody to office, we give them power. We give them the ability to act on our behalf to perform a service. Your job description at your organization is external power given to you by your organization. So you should not be waiting on anybody in your org to tell you how you can lead for equity or anti-racism. Why? Because the 10 bullet points that they've given you are the 10 areas that you can choose to change policy, process, and practice to advance equity and to advance anti-racism. So the first question, if someone comes to you and say, well, why did you change this policy in order to get more women and folks of color engaged? You can say, well, it's part of my job description. You've all given me authority to do that. And so while you may have to engage in a back and forth conversation with someone, we are never sitting without power in an organization. And I wanted to spend some time orienting you there because the first question in the 4-step consciousness raising process is choice. And we teach our partners this, to ask yourself, when you are in a situation that requires leadership, how do I want to use my power? Simply asking yourself that question slows you down. It makes you be more thoughtful because you have a variety of power sources you can use. But one thing you should know is how you choose to use your power. Either you're going to advance equity or you're going to stifle it. And stifle it means you're going to get in the way. So am I going to use my sources of power to help move the needle towards equity and anti-racism? Or am I going to be a barrier and dig my heels in the ground and try to stop it? It's the difference of what we say between trusting yourself to do something or doubting yourself and remaining quiet to sustain the status quo. But again, choice is asking yourself, how do you want to use your power? The second question we tell people to ask is presence. You pause and notice what's happening. So choice is you ask yourself, how do I want to use my power? Presence is the next step because you need to pay attention to what's going on around you. You need to pause and notice, one, how am I currently showing up? How am I currently using my power? And then you should ask yourself, what are the equity implications? What are the barriers that's being put forth? Do people have full and equal access? Are there disparities? Is there, dehumanization of people of color in my space? What are the implications of status quo? How do I want to use my power? And then you have to slow down and pay attention to what's happening. If you ask most people of marginalized groups what's happening, they're going to be able to tell you because they've been real present about what's happening. They've been paying attention and noticing. So step 2 is to slow down and be more thoughtful. The next step is self-awareness. So choice, present, self-awareness is the third step, which means you have to go deeper to understand. So I ask how I want to use my power. I pay attention to what's going on. Then I need to do a check with myself. What's going on inside of me? And then what's going on in my environment? We are never without contextual factors around us. So before I get to the fourth step of intentionality, I need to do a self-check with myself. How am I behaving? What's going on with my emotions? And then what's going on in the environment around me? Is it every time I show up in a meeting with these folks, I stifle equity? And if so, I need to really think about what's about these folks that I'm silent when I get in a meeting. Or why do I hold back in this context and not in another context? So self-awareness is really key in going deeper to understand. The final step is intentionality. And this is you have to decide how to deploy. And this is a military term for readiness. I was in ROTC for 4 years in high school. And you don't deploy. Now, I know this might be sensitive to people given the war that's happening right now in Gaza and Palestine, but I want you to, if possible, to understand the use of the word deploy, which for me is to move with readiness, which means if you make a choice, you decide to be more present, you ask yourself what's going on inside of you and around you, then you can be more thoughtful about how you want to exercise leadership. And this is the part where we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking with myself and the panelists, is given these incredulous times that we're in, you can think about this in one of two ways. There's multiple ones, but this is our offering. You can choose to say, I want to pull up an anchor in sanctuary. That means the best way for me to lead for equity is not to jump into action right now because I'm really triggered and I'm having a hot moment and I need to stabilize myself. Or you can decide, I'm ready to take action. Let me pick a social change role. When we talk about anchors and sanctuaries, all three of us was trained under Dr. Ronald Heifetz at the Harvard's Kennedy School. And one of the things that we talk about with adaptive leadership is that we need to have things to ground us in the moment, and we need to have sanctuaries. So anchors are things to ground you in the moment when you feel destabilized and you feel like all things are breaking out underneath you. And you can ask yourself grounding questions. You can pause before you respond. You can ask, how do I want to use my power if you have core values, or you can use music or soothing sounds. And we give you these examples on the handout that I'm going to give you. But remember, anchor is I need to ground myself in the moment because I need to feel stable. There are things that you can pull out of your pocket. We tell everyone that you should have anchors at your disposal, something that is your go-to, because everything that's happening right now, if you pull up your news feed at any given point, you can feel a range of emotions. Then you also need a daily practice for renewal. Think of this as every day I do something that is not about the movement, that's not about social justice, but I do something to feed my soul. Every day we should all have something to feed our spirit. That can be journaling, that could be tea in your favorite chair, gratitude list, what's giving you hope, exercising, prayer or meditation. but you need something that you do every day in the morning. And I would encourage people to have something before they go to sleep. I actually have a practice in the middle of the day that my team does not schedule meetings for 30 minutes. And that is my quiet God time, because all things seem to hit the haywire in the middle of the day. And I know if I don't ground myself, if I don't have a sanctuary, as someone whose role is to advise and guide, I could be unstable for people that I'm trying to help later in the day. And they're depending on me to show up. So again, if you're going to choose the option of stabilizing myself, because sometimes that's the best course of action, because you're not at your best self right now, or you need to just cool out, you choose an anchor, or you can choose a sanctuary. In these incredulous times, this is you determining how you're going to lead at work or in your community. The second option that we talked about was pick a social change role. In Deepa Iyer's work on movement building, she has 10 different social change roles you can select. I'm not going to go through all 10 because we don't have the time here to go through all 10, but I am going to cover 3 of those roles. And when you get the email from us, you will get a link to her document that has all 10 roles. One of the things I like about Deepa Iyer is that she created this in 2020 during the racial uprisings. And she did this because she wanted to provide people strategies for not how to do something, but what are your options? What are the things that you can do in a social change ecosystem? Because there's various roles we can play. One of the roles we can play is a weaver. We can see the through lines of connectivity, and we bring all these different people together. Today, I'm playing the role of a weaver. I'm sharing with you my 4-step process. I'm bringing on Shahara, I'm bringing on Diane, who are going to bring their level of expertise with movement building and leadership development and equity and justice, and you're getting a woven experience together. Today, I'm playing the role of a weaver. You can also be a disruptor. That's someone that's going to take a stand in your organizations, take a stand for justice in your community. That means you're going to be uncomfortable and take the risky action to break the status quo. Or some people are storytellers. They use art, music, media, movements in order to move the needle for justice. We can think about the work that Dr. Diane Robinson is doing with Yard Girl Productions. She's operating across multiple roles, but she's using the role of story through movies to build a movement. So we all can play different roles in the social change ecosystem, but you have to determine the role that you want to play. You can choose one of those 10 or any other role. But honestly, what I wanted to do today was to slow us down, to say, look, in the midst of everything that we're dealing with right now, from daily racism to the migrant crisis, to genocide in Ghana, to the Israel-Hamas war, wanting to get hostages released, the congressional mayhem, the attacks on DEI, the recovering from the shooting in Maine, which we have not even talked about, the hurricane in Mexico, the hurricane in Afghanistan, right? All these things, it can become overwhelming, plus your own job. And you can't control everything. You can't fix everything, but what you can do is slow down with these 4 steps. You can pause and say, how am I going to use my power? How do I want to use my power? 2, you can be more present and notice what's going on around you and say, hey, what are the equity implications here? How am I currently using it? 3, you can go deeper to understand yourself and your context so that you can move with intentionality. And 4, you can say, what's the best way for me to show up in this moment? And then you make a love intervention. And we say love because we love ourselves and other people enough not to leave the status quo in place. Sometimes a love intervention is giving yourself an in-the-moment grounding with an anchor. Because I'm so triggered, because my identity is being accosted on TV. And so I can't give you a disruptive moment right now. I need to ground myself. Somebody else, yours may be sanctuary. Everybody needs an anchor and sanctuary before you leave here. What are you going to do every day to settle yourself? Because folks, we are in dark times and it's not going away anytime soon. So we are all going to need anchors and sanctuaries, because we can't just be about social change without sustaining ourselves. Our ancestors have shown us, our movement builders present and past have shown us you must have these two. And the last thing is you can choose what social change role you want to play. We offer 3 here. Again, DEEPA has 10 roles: guiders, experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, builders, caregivers, healers, or any other role that your precious heart decides to do. So again, you will have access to the recording of this, so you can go back and listen to it a lot slower. I want to transition to our wonderful panelists. So if I can have Dr. Shahara Jackson and Dr. Diane Robinson come on board. And please get your questions ready. I have some structured questions for them, and then we're going to go into Q&A. I'm going to give you a little bit about their bios here. I'm not going to read it in its totality. You can go back to the registration page, but we're sitting with some very brilliant women. Dr. Shahara Jackson is the founder and chief experience officer of Life Prints. Her philosophy is leading with grace and love. She has devoted her entire career to education and believes that children and adults thrive when grace and love undergirds their learning environment. She has worked as the director of educational services for the largest nonprofit agency serving children in New York City, has taught every grade level from K through 16 plus. From her principalship, she served as a mentor and coach for school and district leaders and an executive coach at Columbia University, where she works with shifting hearts and minds while creating a fair and equitable system for all. Dr. Diane Robinson is a storyteller, consultant, and recognized education leader with 25 years of experience in the U.S. globally and to help start and grow social enterprise. She began her career as a first grade bilingual teacher for Teach for America in Los Angeles, 1994. She has built inclusive and equitable cultures, fundraised millions of dollars, and coached others to develop capacity for equity and justice. Diane made her first film, The Young Vote, which follows a group of students and activists through the 2020 election and unprecedented social unrest and a global pandemic. Welcome to our panelists. Go ahead and get your questions ready because we will get to them in a second. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our first question. How are you balancing holding steady and taking action? How are you balancing between holding steady and taking action? We'll start with Dr. Diane Robinson.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I feel like we're in a sanctuary right now, actually. So thank you for creating this space and inviting me to be a part of this. It's nice to see both you and Shahara and to be a part of the discussion. So how am I holding steady right now? Yeah, I feel like it's just been such a difficult month for me, not just professionally. I mean, honestly, this whole year has been hard, but I also lost a really close friend of mine, so I had to I took some time off actually from work. That actually happened a few days after, everything that started in the Middle East, or restarted, I should say. I think for me, I've been finding a lot of peace, honestly, because I've really been trying to focus on starting with having peace in my heart first, by going to the things that I know that heal me, if that makes sense. So you touched on such great things, both in terms of our sanctuaries and our anchors, but I'm a Buddhist, and I'm finding my Buddhist practice right now is getting me through a lot. I'm reading a lot about Buddhism and creating peace, not, the whole idea of, it's Gandhi too, right? Like starting with yourself. And it's a lot of what we learned about leadership in terms of the role of self. So I'm trying to take care of myself. I don't know what else to say. Like, I'm going to something that brings me peace, which is my Buddhist practice. I've been relying a lot on confidants to help me process what's going on around us, not just globally in the world, but I think you and I had a brief conversation about this, but we have a lot of colleagues that work in this area of equity, and there's been a backlash or whatever you want to call it, right? It's not the first time this has happened in this country that, there's been an effort to bring about equity and that, reconstruction, you name it, like this has happened in our history before. So I'm talking to people who I think I can confide in. And I want to put that out there as just something that's very different than an ally and or somebody who's your friend. But I'm just talking to people who care about me, if that makes sense. And that's been very grounding for me and getting me back to who I am and myself.
Thank you. And I want to just, if you can just quickly in an elevator speech way, meaning we're going from floor 1 to floor 12 in the elevator. That's roughly about 30 seconds. If you can define the difference between a confidant and an ally, because you dropped it at the end, but that's actually a really important thing for people to be able to discern between.
Yeah, I think the distinction for me, and I'd be curious to hear how Shahara thinks of it, is a confidant it's like a college roommate. It's a cousin. I have these friends from the education world, especially I kind of put them in my kitchen cabinet. And these are people that I've been friends with and that I know care about me through like 10 different jobs, if that makes sense, right? So these are people who are there for you no matter what, right? And you can be your full self with your confidants. You can say it all, and oftentimes they'll be like, okay, Diane, you went a little too far there, I don't know about that, right? So they'll bring you back too, right? I think an ally for me is it's somebody who you trust, and they're working with you to solve the problem, but they have loyalties also, right? That can be at conflict with whatever so I have a really good friend who's the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, and she is an ally, right? Like I know this about her. But right now I can't confide in her in the same way, and vice versa, right? So I'm just using that as an example,
right,
because of our loyalties.
Right. And just to kind of take it one level before Dr. Jackson comes in, is the key distinguisher between a confidant and an ally is an ally is only with you to a certain point when interests that they go a different way. So what Diane was describing is that because of what's happening with the genocide in Gaza, that allyship has gone to a place where it can't go any further, because as she expresses her frustrations and outrage of what's happening, that person doesn't have the capacity to hear that because of their own identities and loyalties to their own ancestry. So that's why it's really important to distinguish between an ally and a confidant, because you have to know how far people are going to go, whereas a confidant is with you 100% all the way, ride or die, no judgment. Yeah. Again, and we don't look negatively on our allies, but you got to understand where people's loyalties break from yours. And it's why sometimes people may show up in a meeting and you thought they had your back, but they don't. You're like, what just happened? You just learned that, okay, that's where the allyship stopped. So thank you for that. Okay, Dr. Jackson.
Ooh, first, just thank you, Denise, for having this space, and for being with us in a way that is giving us the opportunity to both share and to release, right? Because right now, the release is being able to say, I'm not okay. I am not okay. And I think for me, the balance between being being able to hold steady is knowing what my capacity is in the moment. And that changes from day to day, right? I have been consuming way too much media in the last 3 weeks. I had actually been off of Instagram for about 2 years. And I think I've been on Instagram now for way too many hours in the last 3 weeks. But I think balancing, holding steady by just consuming what you can, feeling every emotion as it comes, and then thinking about what's in my particular locus of control. And when I'm able to take action, I do so immediately. Thinking about, you know, what would I think 5 years from now if I don't take action? What would I think a week from now if I don't take action? Right? If I don't say this or if I don't do that, what would I think? And would I be able to forgive myself? So that's the piece where I'm balancing holding steady and then taking action.
Thank you. I just want to note in the chat box for folks, I have put in there the 4-step process that you can download. I have also said drop your questions in the Q&A if you want them to be private, or you can drop them in the chat box, but I'm only going to ask them one more question. And then I want to invite your opportunity for questions. You have some of the best and brightest minds as it relates to leading through Incredulous. So use us at your disposal for this free 99 webinar. So the next question I wanted to ask you, and this will be the last one, how can we hold ourselves and other people accountable to remaining committed to equity and justice in the midst of polarization and fear? You know, I think there's a tendency for people to say, because of, you know, all these things that are happening in our world that I've already named, then I freeze at work and I don't do anything, or that I can't do anything. There's this sort of, you know, and then there's this bullying that's happening right now, right? Where people are being blacklisted, jobs are being revoked. You know, people are really coming under fire interpersonally with folks, but also relationally and at their jobs. So how do we not cower in the face of what the present times call for? How do we not personally cower? And how do we hold other people accountable? Like, we still have to advance these issues, right? So how can we hold ourselves and others accountable to remaining committed to equity and justice in the midst of polarization and fear? And you all are getting a lot of love in the chat box. So thank y'all for your beautiful words. We'll start with Dr. Jackson, since we started with Dr. Robinson the last time.
Ooh. I want to just lean into what I shared before, right? If I don't take action, who is going to suffer as a result? I think if we lead with this lens of empathy and, you know, a deeper level of emotional intelligence, it gives us an opportunity to put ourselves not on the back burner, but to put ourselves in the place of those who don't have a voice, those who don't have power, those who don't have the political will to know how to move, right? And so my thought is, first, have a buddy, right? Like, don't go at it alone, right? Understand who, again, are your allies, who are your confidants, who's your no limit soldiers that's going to go with you to the end, right? And understand that we're here for a finite period of time in this life, right? And how do we want to spend our time? And don't count ourselves out. Oftentimes we're thinking, what can I do? I'm only one person, right? And so I think about in this struggle for civil rights and just humanity, I think about Claudette Colvin, whose name many of us don't know. Claudette was before Rosa Parks. Claudette was learning about Harriet Tubman and the struggle in class and got tired and didn't want to give up her seat. But we know Rosa Parks. But before Rosa Parks, there was Claudette, right? And so you may not be Rosa, but you could be Claudette. You still don't have to give up your seat just because you won't get the notoriety. You can stand in your power regardless, whether you're on the news or not. You can stand in your power every day, every moment, but knowing that it's a choice to do so. And knowing that you're going to face backlash, knowing that you might get arrested, knowing that, but if you don't do it, can you live with yourself?
That's beautiful.
Wow. Yes. So many gems there.
Yeah.
So you don't do it. Can you live with yourself? You don't have to be a Rosa, but you can be a Claudette. How do you want to use your power? Wow, all themes that I heard. Okay, Dr. Robinson.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Shahara said it all so beautifully. I mean, the piece around leadership, not doing it alone, like I've been on this since I guess we were in school to learn about this, right? That I've come to realize that leadership is really a collective act, right? And you cannot do it alone. To Shahara's point, and I've had a lot of different roles in my career, and I find myself actually behind the camera these days. I used to be out front a lot, right, on the dance floor, and these days, it's a pleasure and a privilege in many ways to be able to honestly, help empower more young people, right? So just sort of two things for me in terms of how I'm holding myself accountable. I mean, I'm having a hard time sleeping, just to be honest. Like this is like we're living through brutal times right now. And if this does not test who you are as a person and as a human being, then something is wrong. Like if you're not struggling, something is wrong, right? So I find myself the other day I was in DC for work and I had like 2 hours and I went to the African American Museum, and it's 1 hour was not enough, but it was enough for me to like walk through the halls and see that there were people who went before me and that sacrificed a great deal for me to be in that museum, right? Um, and it reminded me, like, art, music, all of those things actually remind me of who I am. In addition to your confidants, in addition to your allies, I think right now we all need to be grounding ourselves in what we truly value and who we truly are, right? And I think we all went through this activity at one point when we were training with Ron, but when he basically tells you, nope, you're not your gender, you're not your race, you're not, and all of us were like, what's he talking about, right? And he was pushing us to get to this point of, well, what do you stand for? Like, what's essential, right? And I think more than anything else right now, what's become clear to me, especially because I'm having conversations with people that I thought I knew, right? Who were saying things to me like, what's going on over there has nothing to do with us. And I'm like, wait a minute, injustice everywhere. Is it a threat to injustice for all of us, right? I was like, Martin Luther King, you know what I mean? And it's like, it becomes clear what your values are. So I say, do those things to help clarify your values, right? And what you will stand for, like what you will go to the grave for. And those are the things I'm doing a lot of right now to hold myself accountable, because the people that are pushing back on the equity work we all do, all of that, I would argue they never believed in it. Like they never truly valued it, right? So to me, it's like clarity is a good thing because once you can actually see clearly, then you can actually start to intervene as a leader in that system by building your allies, by helping to define what the problem at the center is, all of that. So, right now I've shifted towards being a storyteller, and I'm thinking very deeply about what do I need to do next. Um, with the experience I have, the people I know, like, all of it. I think we all need to be doing that, quite honestly, because those are the times we're living through. So I would say hold yourself accountable by getting clear on what you value, taking a look, to your point, at like, what role do you want to play? Maybe it's right where you are, right? Or maybe it's something else. So I would just say that, it's a multi-pronged process, but it's also got to be constant reflection, especially at times like this.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the both of you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to look through the chat box to see if we have any questions, but I just appreciate your insights. Diane, I heard you saying clarity. Know what's important to you and what do you value? What role do you want to play? And then it's a process of constant reflection. And I think that's what my 20 minutes beforehand talked about, and what each of you have been saying. We've been marching to the same beat of getting a sense of how you want to use your power, what's important to you, really beginning to think about how you want to show up, how do you want to ground yourself to stay in it, whether it's your faith-based practices or working out or whatever that might be for you, leaning in with your confidants, people you can be fully yourself with, and then being thoughtful about the type of roles that you want to play. Are you going to be able to sleep at night if you're silent at your job about the racial microaggressions that are happening? Are you going to be able to sleep at night if you're silent about what's going on? And so we're just offering the 4 steps and their wisdom to you as an opportunity to be able to think about how to be more thoughtful in this process. I'm going to